So someone made a video essay about the visual novel Echo. Yes, it is for furries. Which is honestly rare, and I very much appreciate that. But after a few days of marinating in it, I realized I have to make some type of response video, because I haven't disagreed with a video essay this much in a long time. So when this content creator stated that this Patreon-funded game had, quote, the budget of a greeting card, I immediately had reservation. And then I had many. A lot. Damn near the entire damn video. So let's get into it. I'll admit that I'm not used to people criticizing what I believe to be a masterpiece, or that I was really ready to hear someone tell me that it was messy, or that the glowing perception of it had aged with time. So, maybe I'm biased. And I have no intention of hating on another furry creator, I want to make that very clear. But I am gonna go through this video piece by piece, so maybe you'll understand why I'm left wondering if we've even played the same game. So for context, I am a nobody on the internet who's been a nobody on the internet for quite some time, and I'm not really used to doing stuff like this. I suppose I should give some context on what Echo is. It's a furry visual novel. It is very horror-centric. I even jokingly refer to it as like a furry Stranger Things, although it's a lot more complicated than that. And because of that, it has a pretty lofty reputation within the furry community, especially those who are gay. Most of the video essays thus far have been pretty complimentary on the subject, so this one was kind of interesting. It is probably one of the most popular VNs within the entire furry space. For those of you who are new here, Echo is a furry visual novel surrounding 6 friends reconnecting in their small conservative hometown after 3 of them moved away to go to college. The friend group is fragile, and there's a lot of unresolved trauma within the group. A lot of it is exacerbated by how they have and currently treated each other unfairly in the past. You play as Chase, an Asiatic river otter with a dull, if apathetic personality, who experiences different versions of a mass hysteria that descends upon their hometown of Echo, depending on which of his childhood friends he's romancing. I'm going to give a very glib synopsis of each route, as I'm assuming if you are listening to a response video to someone else's post, you're likely already familiar with the source material. Leo is a passionate and hot-headed Latino red wolf whose route consists of an attempt to rekindle an old flame. Leo is protective of Chase to the point of being domineering and possessive. The intensity of the route escalates the story to a slasher, as Leo's enemies begin to target Chase, in part because of a paranormal apparition of himself lurking around town. Jenna is a smart and often pretentious indigenous kit fox who has a competitive relationship with her childhood friend Leo, whose route consists of a personal journey where she comes to terms with her abusive childhood, her culture, and her feelings of resentment toward the people who hurt her. Her route also dissolves into a fight for survival amidst the shady figures lurking around town. Carl is an unmotivated and repressed ram who was Chase's closest friend as a child. He's the heir to a wealthy family with an influential legacy. His route is more of a suspense story as he and Jenna and Chase navigate a horror funhouse version of his mansion. As Jenna and Carl get possessed by their respective ancestors, they uncover horrifying colonial secrets that give context for the haunted nature of Echo and their adversarial relationship with each other. Flynn is a brash and promiscuous Gila lizard whose anger over the death of the group's mutual friend Sydney a decade prior causes a rift between himself and the other characters. The route involves an attempt to make amends with his friends and appropriately broach the topic. And TJ is an innocent Christian lynx who is most affected by Sydney's death as he witnessed her drowning at Lake Emma. The route consists of a ghost story in which the characters embark on an old scavenger hunt Sydney created seemingly post-mortem in an attempt to uncover the mysterious circumstances around his death. Chase's role in these routes oscillates from him being a largely passive player, observing the events surrounding him, to actively driving the plot forward. The central romances often factor less into the transition from one plot beat to the other, as much as looming paranormal phenomenon and a town's lurking cryptid, shedding light on the character dynamics with each other. I didn't do the plot justice, I'm sure, but reading Echo, I assure you, was a consistently surprising and fresh experience. For more reasons than simply that I just never read a VN before this, I can say it's genuinely unlike any other experience I've had with a work of art. I'm going to give a disclaimer here. I am referring to this YouTuber as the YouTuber or this content creator, not only because I cannot pronounce their goddamn username, but because I don't want to seem as pointed in my criticisms as I'm already going to.
While Echo doesn't have the most unique premise, its uncanny similarity to other games is very intentional.
I'll admit I'm not an avid VN reader, but from what I know about visual novels, the concept of this one being a horror game and essentially an anti-dating simulator, focusing more on effective storytelling than wish fulfillment, was actually the thing that was quite subversive and unique about it, no? Maybe I'm missing something. But I've at least previewed a lot of visual novels besides this one, and, well, to be frank, Echo being among the more famous does make sense if I put it tactfully. So I'm not exactly sure what this criticism is referring to in regards to the cliches. The criticisms start pretty early on in the video, and the cliche comment was one thing, but then he calls the plot shallow? I get into that more, but I think you'll see what I mean when I make my further point. While also acknowledging that as a person that does not read horror, maybe I am just not very familiar with horror tropes. I do want to give appreciation to the well-made visuals of the video. The background of visual novels and the historical context given is honestly great. I've never seen that applied to a VN video before, and I love it.
It otherwise follows this conventional visual novel structure so closely to a T, it essentially becomes a part of what it's dissecting, even down to moments of intimacy that feel ripped from any generic erotica. They may serve a greater narrative purpose to reveal more insight on these characters and their messy relationships, but their generally voyeuristic nature makes them hard to distinguish from wish fulfillment.
I cannot believe someone said this. The visual novel that forgoes sex scenes to the point that where they rarely happen is too wish fulfillment. I thought visual novels basically started as just basically graphic content. TJ is almost as big a fan favorite as Leo. Do you know how many people were crushed that TJ never got a sex scene? Because the writers seemingly understood that this is just not something the character would engage in? When I played this game 2 years ago, my biggest takeaway was just how impressed I was that it wasn't just porn all the time. That unlike most gay media, there was actually some restraint in that department. Like any other media that I have seen growing up in the 2000s would have lent into the more experienced person dominating an innocent Christian as like a sexual fantasy. One of the writers openly talked about trimming the love scene with Chase and Leo, presumably because it didn't serve the story for it to go on for that long. For example, another route where Chase is not actively pursuing Leo and actively shows no interest in him, Leo actually assaults Chase at a family plex. Yeah. And any other gay media would have presented that as titillating and aspirational. How can the game be voyeuristic if there's not a single pornographic CG in the entire game? The YouTuber also made some points about pacing issues and not utilizing the visual novel medium to its advantages, and frankly, these are things that I don't personally mind because I actually like the variety. I like how slow-paced the Carl route is compared to the constant tension and danger in Leo's route. But I get why that's jarring. But again, I'm not experienced with VNs enough to know if that criticism is really valid.
But all that slow build-up amounts to nothing when other routes immediately bring out his worst qualities. It's hard to go back to his route and invest in the more personal or sensual scenes with him when the reader already knows he's a wolf in sheepskin.
I mean, when you're taking character writing into consideration, it does make sense that the route when Leo is effectively getting what he wants, Chase is paying attention to him and reciprocating his affections, that would stave off his bad behavior a little longer versus when he's actively being ignored. In some routes, to the point where I feel like Chase is being kind of unnecessarily mean to someone he agreed to meet and reconnect with during spring break. This is going to come up later with some criticism they had for Jenna's route, but my point is, I don't know why this person feels like the escalation of Leo's toxicity is just so out of character for someone that carried a gun to defend himself against conflict with another character he himself instigated out of spite. I'm already getting heated. I can feel it. And I'm trying not to be mean, but there is a trend in this video where there are these seemingly obvious bad interpretations coupled with like easily fixed mistakes, like referring to Jenna as Jenna for most of the video and Carl as the goat. I was second-guessing myself, like, am I dumb? Is goat and ram used interchangeably and I just didn't know this? Looked it up. No, it's not. Yes, it's a petty nitpick, but it's a petty nitpick that had me gaslighting myself, and I'm mad about that.
These scenes drag on for far too long, involve a game of cat and mouse between the ghosts of Carl and Jenna's ancestors that's very hard to care about, and worst of all, they're not scary. They're boring.
Are you not gay? You can't find joy in two messy exes being bitches and trying to end each other? It's like Death Becomes Her, but with old men. That's amazing.
The one connection this ghost subplot had to Carl's struggles was completely soiled by how awful James was. Not just as an antagonist, but just as a character. He's not just the founding father of the town who played a key role in the town's original mass hysteria case. Oh no, no, no. He's also a sodomist, and a pedophile, and a serial killer, and the owner of a private sex dungeon where he'd kidnap, torture, rape, and murder a bunch of Native American children. I just can't take this seriously anymore. He feels ripped from a bad creepypasta that tries way too hard to make its villain evil.
I would have said the same thing about an orange ex-reality TV star with the vocabulary of a 5th grader not only being president, but is somehow charismatic enough to form a genuinely intimidating cult following that tried to instate an insurrection on the Capitol building when he lost a fair election. The synopsis of that political thriller presented to me, I would have laughed at. That would have been cartoonish and unbelievable had I not been actively living in that timeline for over a decade. Rich guy with power and influence graping kids of an unprotected racial class cannot be the thing what breaks your suspension of disbelief. Come on, man. It's at this point in the video that I start to feel like he's just saying stuff because, oh, this is just the stuff that people say in video essays, right? I'm firmly of the belief that you can get an audience to buy into anything if you are sincere enough.
This cartoonish evil murder.
Yeah.
This has to be the most insufferable criticism of the entire video, and I really hope I don't have to explain that. I'm gonna get a little bit mean, but oh my fucking god. Dude, are you not living in the same reality that I'm living in? Are you not seeing the absolutely absurd nude bulletins that have been coming out constantly for the last, 9 years? Like, this isn't surgeons in Grey's Anatomy doing the hanky-panky in between 10-hour life and death procedures. It shouldn't be that absurd that a rich prick would exploit and terrorize the minority community in this way. What history books have you not read?
It could have been a lot worse, but to say it had squandered potential would be an understatement. I'm sorry, Carl. You might be a nice goat, but you were not given the chance to be the goat.
It's the Ram, you fuck!
Brian isn't a super compelling villain, and his goofy sprites don't help, but he's written well enough that he serves his purpose as a threat. He's not only based on the real-life toy box killer in New Mexico, which makes all his scenes disturbing to read.
This is another one I hope I don't have to explain, but he could have stood to explain why Brian isn't compelling because I'm not buying it. Make the case, my guy. I want you to convince me, but you just dropped it. That sprite is unnerving. The pose is stupid, but he's a stupid bear that's also dangerous.
But the way I interpret it, he's meant to be a chilling parallel to Leo, representing the monster he might eventually become if he doesn't learn to break his obsession. He was another gay man who grew up in an unwelcome environment, shared a teen romance that ended in tragedy, and was psychologically tortured by the supernatural.
I do not share that interpretation. You make some good points here, but then you completely prove yourself wrong by saying exactly what I was thinking. Leo will never be a pre-current day Brian because Brian is another level of monstrousness. There's that point of, oh, well, they both grew up in bad environments. To say that about each of them separately is true, but that connects this idea of Brian growing up in an abusive household, and for Leo, it's just growing up in a small conservative town, which is also true for Brian. But Leo didn't grow up in an abusive household. Leo's conservative but accepting family creates the Leo that can publicly pride himself on and flaunt his gay relationship. These individual circumstances are too far away from each other to make a connection.
As heinous as Leo's actions are, he was only plagued by the embrace of Echo for about 4 years. Not his entire life, to the point where drugs, sex, and sadistic torture are the only ways he can heal or feel a sense of joy.
At his worst, Leo would never be a successor to Brian. And you pretty much say that.
So many scenes in this route do not flow well together, and tend to happen for the dumbest of conveniences. For example, in this scene, it's revealed that all of Chase's friends are texting Leo, demanding answers as to why Chase hasn't shown up around them. Why don't they think to just call Chase on his phone then? He's used it many times before, and the phone service isn't dead yet at this point in the story. So what's stopping them?
Yes, that is a great point. I'd actually just thought about it not long before this video was posted. There may have been a reason given, like Leo tells his friends that Chase is too busy and therefore they don't text him. But even with that, that is a bit of a stretch for a reader to accept as a reason why they don't just do the obvious.
When Chase, Leo, and Kudzu flee the basement where the otter was held hostage, why did they decide to bring the kidnapper and potential killer along? That's a disaster waiting to happen, and who could have guessed? He steals Chase's car keys when no one was there to look, and steals his car, ruining their chance to escape.
Would you want a guy who held you hostage and just has minions roaming around to just potentially get the opportunity to find you again once you leave? They weren't gonna kill him. They openly discussed in that basement where they were going and who they were looking for. Taking Duke as a hostage is the only smart option.
When they do eventually find Carl and TJ and try to escape with his van, why did they decide to leave right there when the whole group is not together? Do Jenna and Flynn not mean anything to these guys?
No one fucking likes Flynn. I'm kidding. But yeah, that is messed up. And I'll give you props for noticing something that's honestly pretty obvious in retrospect. I certainly didn't notice it. They also say how the monster is a contrived reason to get them yeeted into the lake so they can go back to Leo's house. If it were, why didn't they just drive to Leo's goddamn house first then? We needed to see the monster on the highway. Where's your sense of fun?
When Chase needs to take a leak in Kudzu's trailer, but Jenna's already in the bathroom, why doesn't he just pee in the sink if it's urgent?
Because you don't ask to piss in a stranger's sink. I mean, maybe I would have if I were scared to be alone outside, but I don't know, Chase didn't seem to be. God, this is like cinema sins.
The final dialogue choice feels way too hollow for a moment that's supposed to have a ton of emotional weight.
What? I need you to understand my dissent. We haven't even gotten to the 30-minute mark of this video yet. It is an hour and 10 minutes long. My last 3 points were all within the 26-minute mark alone. Oh my god, where do I even begin with this? This is nerd outrage.
As it is, though, it's a revelation that just sort of happens amidst the tense scene. Either that or the bad ending happens, and thanks, I hate it. This ending sucks. The urban legend it calls back to on Thursday lacks any relevance to the story's themes to justify its parallel to Chase's death.
Aside from the fact that you just labeled the biggest gut punch of the entire game as a contrivance, you also contradict yourself by spelling out and connecting the themes of the railway incident and the story Clint tells to the final choice of the game, while also saying that it's not connected. What are you doing? I'll admit the choice at the end is a little flawed. From a woman's perspective, being punished for placating a dangerous man kind of falls flat. Realistically, being firm and direct with men is what leads to violence. We want to say back off, but you're likely going to give them a fake phone number and hope that placates them enough to get away. So you're going to tell Leo anything you want to hear. Oh yeah, we're working out. Whether you mean it or not, it's just anything to get this stupid-ass wolf on the fucking train. You need assurance of our relationship now, Leo? I've been kidnapped twice. I've been groped, held hostage, assaulted, nearly murdered in a cave while you were making kissy faces with the pillow. There's a monster on the highway. The train is leaving. We are going to die. My point is, it matters more that the choice works thematically, and it does. Chase is surprisingly passive for a VN protagonist. The entire problem with his relationship to Leo is that if he had just dumped him, Leo wouldn't be so fucked up about it. The choice to say it's over is character development, and a satisfying development. He is like that weak girl in a young adult novel that develops into a confident woman. Let's just say that it is contrived. Somehow. Does that lessen the emotional impact it left? Chase breaking down in tears alone on the side of the train car while reflecting on leaving Leo behind and how the town destroyed all of their lives. That is some of the most deeply impactful story writing I've read in a while. By the end of Leo's route, I was in tears for a week, exactly. That's what it is. Post-Leo depression, damn it, I'm coining it. He also said the bad ending sucks, instead of cheap chalk value.
This isn't a scary antithesis to the route, it's just edgy meme fuel.
Bro, don't piss me off. This entire point he made about Leo's endings, I view it as just bad media literacy. Enough to actively insult the writers at this point.
But the general execution of this route leaves me a bit torn. There's a similar issue to Leo's route where some parts of the plot feel a little too scattershot and raise unnecessary questions about the setting's logic. For example, how did TJ get one of the main scavenger hunt MacGuffins into a neighbor's closet? Did he break in not knowing that a different person had moved into Sydney's house? Would he have seen the lights on and politely knocked on the door to ask if he could hide a box there?
Dude, it's a fucking mystery, alright? Not everything is supposed to be explained. Real-world logic within the framework of this novel is usually warped by the paranormal. I am going to be less mean as we go through this video, but I did nearly have a moment where I congratulated the YouTuber for correctly identifying Chase's attraction to TJ as being a parallel to Leo's obsession with Chase, but, you know, that's a bit too cunty, and that was mostly just coming from the agitation I got from when he called this route boring. He was talking about how once you figure out what Chase did, that it's a boring read, as if to say the strength of the writing and the intrigue of how it all happened isn't also a part of what makes the reveal interesting. I'm sorry, it's just such a frustratingly myopic way of looking at art. But yeah, I agree that he feels as though TJ is an underdeveloped character. It's almost a disservice to his character that he wasn't the one to kill Sydney. That would have provided a lot of extra depth to him and his psychology, but that went directly to Chase instead. So as a result, his character arc, not his route, might I add, feels anticlimactic or unsatisfying. Like, there is still more to explore with TJ.
He was encouraged by his friend to not let others take advantage of his gullibility, but in the end he failed to do just that. He gives into the manipulation of that same friend, leading him down a dark path. This ending is still shocking thanks to Chase's side of the story, but it doesn't really feel like the tragic end of a character who failed to overcome his own social challenges. The best response I got when I thought of TJ was, well, damn. Sucks to be you, I guess.
But again, that he could be replaced with a plank of wood thing, that feels like another tacked on criticism that you seem to write in because you thought it would just fit here, without investigating whether or not that's actually true of the character. Like, I'm trying to find a way to express to you that there are so many of these cliche critic statements throughout this video that it's almost like plagiarism at this point.
To Flynn, being a homosexual is repulsive and fills him with utter dread and shame.
What? When? I think Flynn has numbed out shame as an emotion, don't you think? I don't think Gila's come with that toolset.
It's the only way he accepts this part of his identity, since it brings him short-term relief in ways his body says yes to, without having to face the stress of being open in public. It's why he indulges so much in shady circles, partially why he was disgusted by Chase's relationship with Leo, and why eventually banging Leo himself gave him no sense of joy or pride.
I know that's what Chase reams him for after leaving the smoke room, but his more placid response kind of says it all. Like, oh, way off base, and then he digs into him. That's not the response of someone that's been accurately called out. It legitimately doesn't apply. If he did, he'd be losing his shit like he did at the lake. We know that Flynn comes from a conservative family, and he was the subject of homophobic rumors in school, but we never really get the idea that he ever cared enough to internalize it. He's openly promiscuous, and that's not a secret. I understand that Flynn is set up to be that type of character, but I am again wondering if you just kind of projected that onto him because that's what you're used to seeing from a character like Flynn. This is a thought I have a little less conviction about because I very well could be wrong, and it might be something left up to interpretation. I just don't think internalized homophobia was the reason he resented Chase and Leo's relationship when it was clear from every other character that they were being self-absorbed and obnoxious throughout it. I will say that his commentary on TJ and Flynn as characters are the most incisive so far. He does accurately clock that TJ is kind of wasted as a character, and Flynn becoming Socket Man is clearly a late-stage idea that got written in at the last minute. I learned something from that. That's not something I picked up on before. But then he goes back to his nonsensical commentary about Leo.
There's also this one branching scene that either means completely nothing if the reader chose Flynn's roommate, or severely undermines the impact of a different route if the reader chose Leo. I'm honestly not a fan of the idea that Leo can just get over his year's worth of unhealthy fixation in just a week after an earlier meltdown.
Where and how did you come to that conclusion? Because you kind of lost me again. A huge chunk of analysis on Jenna's route goes by, and I was honestly impressed by the insights they brought, but At the same time, that chunk also included the 8th time he brought up scenes being copied and pasted from one route to the other, as if that's not inevitable when you're reliving the same week over and over. And of course, the minute we start talking about fucking Leo, his brain breaks again.
I can't stand this scene at the mall. Leo's lust for the Chussie is so exaggerated in such a short amount of time that it feels like I'm reading an abridged parody. In what world would this same wolf publicly dry hump him against a claw machine in a kiddie arcade?
What exaggeration? The guy that didn't take the hint for 3 years wasn't gonna be deluded enough to grope Chase in public like he owned him? Man pulled a gun on Kunzu because anyone being nice to his otter was a threat.
Leo's watered down to this complete lamp that gets into fights, becomes half unconscious for most of the weekend, and gets called out as a meathead by Jenna just so she looks better by default and to remind readers that yes, this is her route. That is just lazy.
Again, what's lazy? I see that scene as more of a tool to reveal Jenna's character, her feelings towards Leo, her ability to read a situation for what it is and call them out, and foreshadowing her superiority complex. What was presented as comical about Leo's behavior here? Everybody stopped in shock when he broke that pinball machine. The cop was running after him for the entire rest of the route. Also, I know that I'm probably going to set myself up for trouble with this, and I don't want to go there, but it is hard for me not to read a little bit of fandom misogyny into this comment. Maybe not so much on the part of this YouTuber, but maybe just him condensing all the most popular criticisms about Jenna over the years. Because this kind of downplays Leo's actually alarming and threatening behavior by framing Jenna as this Miss Marvel type perfect girl boss. Which I don't think is true about Jenna, because those girl bosses you see in Hollywood never get called out like Jenna does. I honestly really appreciate that, because there's a lot of pressure that comes from female representation where the girl is constantly the moral high ground and never has any flaws to challenge her on, especially when she's flanked by a bunch of men. In multiple routes, when she gets on her self-righteous soapbox, people have told her to flat out shut up. By Carl, by Micah several times. And like Leo, I have to give Jenna props because, unlike most other characters, she has a moment where she takes ownership of her bad behavior and apologizes for them. There's a particular emphasis on Jenna being unlikable that doesn't seem to get matched when talking about Leo or Flynn, who in my opinion are way worse. But this is a sentiment that is pretty standard for Echo fans across social media for reasons I already alluded to. This YouTuber does seem to be about as annoyed as I am that Jenna essentially spends her own route being upstaged by Leo's insufferable fuck-ups, and nothing she does moves the plot forward until the end.
And I'm sorry if I sound petty, but I do not buy that Jenna learned to move on when she only got a slap in the wrist for all the nasty things she did to her friends. And those apologies she gave Leo and Chase in the end are so insincere, she might as well have just pulled out an ukulele.
I'll concede that I just have a difference of opinion. I didn't think the apology was insincere. Again, she was called out for giving so much of a fuck about a relationship that's not even hers, and she lets her pride go enough for her to just admit that she was jealous of their relationship, as well as all of the other privileges her upbringing didn't afford her. I hardly see her eating crow and fessing up as being insincere. And guess what? Most of what he said about the van scene in Jenna's route actually had me jump up and be like, yes, you are right to say that gay kids throw themselves into adult spaces because they have no other recourse. They do have little guidance outside of porn. This is something I never heard anyone else verbalize. For the first time, me and this content creator, we were seeing eye to eye. Because no one ever thinks of it like that, much less verbalizes it. The portion of it that I couldn't get quite on board with, though, was the implication of Leo having groomed Micah into filming themselves. I mean, this one is going to be a little controversial because you could say that by nature of Leo just being older, he automatically would groom Micah, no matter what he does in the situation. I do think it is somewhat important to weigh. I mean, it is fucked up that Leo was messing around with a 13-year-old when he was 17. I'm willing to give the tiniest bit of grace to Leo because he was legally still a child at the time, albeit leaps and bounds ahead of Micah developmentally. Leo's actions are often unforgivable, but my controversial hot take is that I honestly wonder if a good portion of the gay folks who messed around with someone younger, particularly in older generations, may have done so more because of a lack of options, not always because of malicious intent. In historical context, I do often wonder if being gay was less a shameful thing, that maybe they wouldn't be more likely to try to exploit an unequal power dynamic by getting with someone younger who is less likely to out them. I know that that's an incredibly dangerous take for me to have. It is just a suggestion. I'm not saying it's fact, and you are free to disagree with me. But I do kind of apply this suggestion that I have to Leo's character because of his and Micah's mutual embarrassment on the matter. They're so embarrassed by what happened that they won't even say what they did out loud. You, as the reader, are kind of forced to pull the pieces together and figure it out yourself. Quick editing note here. I think I failed to verbalize sufficiently what I meant to say regarding the Leo scene. I didn't care for the overly broad statement that Leo groomed Micah. I feel as though that's just another very lazy way to write this off. And I'm not even saying that by some definition that he wasn't grooming Micah, but I do think that it's just too easy to just leave it at it's grooming, or that the authors had Leo groom Micah, because they'd ignored the sticky nuances that while Leo was legally a minor himself, he was damn near close to not being considered one. But even as is, I'm a grown person. A 17-year-old might as well be a child to me, so I can't in good faith read the story and attempt to apply this to a real-life scenario and frame Leo as necessarily being that malicious, because grooming implies more malicious intent, like coaxing someone into a situation they clearly don't want to be a part of and offering material or other stimuli to desensitize them into going along with it. Like, the arrangement was just not his idea. No matter what, he should have just fucking said no. That's undeniable. Like, plenty of teenagers want to mess around with adults far older than Leo, but the adults have to be the one to say, absolutely not, you don't actually want this, you are going to regret this, and you're too damn young. This fictional situation is just simply not that cut and dry, and considering this same critique comes from someone who thinks a pretty basic gay colonist is just too damn unrealistic of an antagonist to take seriously, I'm not surprised that he would not deliver this information with the complexity that matches the story that he is criticizing. So, just wanted to clarify that. It's kind of funny, though, as a side note, that the one time this YouTuber has a point that cuts Leo some slack, I have reservations against. I honestly do love the Not Like Us audio bite being used in a push-in shot of Leo. Like, that was kind of brilliant.
I'm not against stories that have disturbing subject matter like this, but this whole scene just felt like a baffling, misguided, creative decision.
Honestly, the van scene is probably the most emotionally complicated part of the whole story for me, and my feelings on the matter are very yes and as new opinions pair with the old ones. I first read about this scene on the Wikia, and I was very hurt by it as a Leo stan. But in execution, when I finally did read this route, I was kind of struck by how maturely the subject was handled. I said before that similar incidents in gay fiction would have been completely sensationalized, because any kid, let alone a gay kid, getting physical at that age would have been like, hell yeah, because that's rebellion. You're doing everything society tells you not to do. And when you're gay and you're doing that, it must feel downright revolutionary. In practice, that behavior is downright outrageous and extremely risky. And this visual novel actually frames it that way instead of eroticizing it. When compared to Hollywood slop like Call Me By Your Name, whose author flat out admitted to being attracted to underage girls, Echo's handling of irresponsible underage relationships in this way seems almost transgressive. However, my new opinion is that the whole thing seems kind of needless. It changes the context of Chase's prior relationship to Leo, but what difference does that make when he's pursuing Jenna, and they never actually do have a conversation about how hurt Chase felt? I actually think this is closer to being the cheap chalk value that he accused the bad Leo ending of being. But it wouldn't feel that way if there was any explanation as to why Micah was filming it or why Leo agreed to do it. Hence why the entire scene just kind of feels very slapdash. The space that could have gone to exploring that was instead taken up by Jenna condemning Leo in a way that seemed far more about her pre-existing resentment of him than an indictment of the situation at hand. I and some other people I've talked to have read into it as a commentary on the hypersexuality enforced on queer children, or floating the possibility that Micah was selling cheese pizza to pay for drug money. But that's honestly just me doing more homework the teacher didn't ask me to do. You get what I'm saying? So the conclusion I draw now is that while the van scene is not eroticized, it's still sensationalized in a way that is questionable, if for no other reason than that there's no inner commentary to justify the scene's existence. As far as the short stories go, I did like the YouTuber's read on the short story Lights being an exploration of TJ's religious guilt when interacting with Chase and Leo's raunchy antics and him feeling haunted by Echo's cryptids. I'm glad I'm being more complimentary toward the end because I really don't want to be mean to a YouTuber with one video under their belt, but honestly, the video calling Echo a mess is indeed a mess of its own. Most of the criticisms, in my honest opinion, are unfair or unfounded, and most of the insights that are gleaned are somewhat superficial. But I do appreciate the production quality and how they contextualize the game with the development cycle, old concept art I've never seen before, and real-world events that likely affected the story. But I do feel like they often forget that this is an indie project, and kind of criticizes it as though it was a large corporate project with many heads and lots of resources to its name. As a trans woman, I can't say I appreciate that the only trans character in the entire Echoverse seems to be the sex worker at the smoke room, but after listening to a podcast with Keith Ballard, I kind of agree that it's unfair for fans to chastise VN developers for not representing every minority under the sun. There is room to question the likelihood that anyone Indigenous or Latino worked behind the scenes while still having characters of those identities represented, or side-eye the lack of any remotely feminine gay men depicted in the Echo games. But this is not the Disney company. These are not products focus grouped to placate a very specific demographic in the most superficial way they can get away with. These are extremely individualized and personal projects with people who can't depict experiences they don't have. So I don't hold these games to an incongruous standard, and neither should anyone else. But I do agree that the company's peak is probably behind them, and after the internal drama that spilled over last year, it's kind of sad to think Echo Project may go defunct soon. But hey, their work still deserves credit. They're famous within the fandom for a reason. I would honestly love to see a world where Echo, or a game like Echo, gets mainstream treatment, so the whole world can know what gay storytelling has to offer. It's just such a shame that even within the vanishingly small queer community, huge chunks of it will never engage with furry storytelling because they dismiss it as horny trash that flirts with bestiality. Reading queer stories from queer people was like the first drink of water after a drought, and I'll never not be grateful that this piece of art made it into the world.